in a distant corner of the galaxy, far beyond the reaches of what most humans could imagine, Earth was no longer the center of attention. It had been centuries since humanity first left its cradle and ventured into the stars. But now, it was just another name on a long list of planets under the watchful eye of the Galactic Council. The Council was made up of dozens of alien races, each more advanced than the last. They were beings with shimmering skin, glowing eyes, and technologies that seemed like magic to anyone who didn't understand them. And then there were the humans. Fragile, short-lived creatures who still relied on flesh and blood soldiers instead of machines or cybernetic enhancements. The Galactic Council often spoke about humanity in whispers, their voices tinged with pity. Humans were seen as relics of an earlier time, stubbornly clinging to outdated ways of fighting wars. While other species developed fleets powered by artificial intelligence, humans continued to send living, breathing people into battle. To many, in the Council, this was both foolish and wasteful. Why risk lives when machines could do the job better? But despite their doubts, humanity had survived. Against all odds, they had carved out a place for themselves among the stars. On Earth, however, life moved at a slower pace. In a quiet town surrounded by rolling hills, an old man named John Carter sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. His hair was gray, and lines etched deep into his weathered face told stories of battles fought long ago. John wasn't alone. Across the country, others like him lived quiet lives, their days filled with memories of war and sacrifice. One such person was Rachel Monroe, a woman whose sharp mind and steady hands had once saved countless lives on the battlefield. Now, she spent her days tending to her garden, trying to forget the horrors she had witnessed. Neither John nor Rachel thought much about the galaxy beyond Earth anymore. The Council rarely called upon humanity for anything important, and even when they did, it was usually for menial tasks. Humanity's glory days were over, or so everyone believed. But things were about to change. Far away from Earth, near the edge of known space, something stirred. A fleet of ships unlike anything the Council had ever seen appeared suddenly, moving with purpose toward the Sol system. These ships belonged to the Zorathians, a race feared throughout the galaxy for their ruthless efficiency and unmatched firepower. The Zorathians didn't negotiate. They didn't trade. They conquered. And now they were heading straight for Earth. News of the approaching fleet spread quickly through the Council chambers. Panic rippled through the gathered representatives as they debated what to do. Some argued for immediate evacuation, while others suggested sending diplomatic envoys to negotiate peace. But one thing was clear. No one wanted to face the Zorathians head-on. Their reputation preceded them, and the thought of engaging them in open combat sent shivers down spines. It was during this chaos that someone mentioned the humans. At first, the idea was met with laughter. Humans. What could they possibly do against such a formidable foe? Their weapons were primitive compared to those used by other species, and their tactics were considered outdated. But as the discussion dragged on, desperation began to take hold. Someone pointed out that humans had always been resourceful, finding ways to win even when the odds were stacked against them. Another noted that humanity's refusal to give up, no matter how dire the situation, might be exactly what was needed to stop the Zorathians. Reluctantly, the Council agreed to contact Earth. A message was sent to General Marcus Hale, a retired officer who still commanded respect among his peers. When he received the transmission, he listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with each passing word. Afterward, he sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. Finally, he stood up and began making calls. John Carter was the first to receive the summons. He was surprised to hear from Hale after so many years, and even more surprised by the request. "We need you," Hale said simply. There was no room for argument in his tone, only urgency. John hesitated before agreeing to meet him in Washington, D.C., where plans were already being drawn up. Rachel Monroe got the call shortly after. Like John, she was skeptical at first. I'm too old for this, she muttered to herself as she packed a small bag. But deep down, she knew she couldn't say no. Not when the fate of humanity hung in the balance. When John and Rachel arrived, in Washington, they found themselves standing face to face once again. Time had changed them both, but the bond they shared remained strong. As they exchanged greetings, Hale entered the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. He wasted no time getting to the point. "The Zorathians are coming," he said bluntly. "Their fleet is massive and they show no signs of slowing down. We don't have the resources to fight them directly, and the Council isn't going to help us. That leaves us with one option. We hit them hard and fast using every trick we've got." John raised an eyebrow. "And you think we can pull that off?" Hale nodded. "You've done it before. You and your team were the best we had back in the day. If anyone can figure out a way to stop them, it's you." Rachel crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. "What's the plan?" Hale handed them a data pad containing preliminary details. "We're retrofitting the Aurora, one of the oldest ships in our fleet. It's not much, but it's all we've got. You'll need to assemble a team, train them, and come up with a strategy. We don't have much time." As John and Rachel studied the information, a sense of determination began to build within them. This was their chance to prove that humanity wasn't obsolete, that even in their twilight years, they still had what it took to protect their home. For the first time in decades, John felt a spark of excitement. He glanced at Rachel, who gave him a knowing look. They might be older, slower, and out of practice, but they weren't beaten yet, not by a long shot. Little did they know the road ahead would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But for now, they were ready to step back onto the battlefield. One last time. End of Part 1. John Carter and Rachel Monroe stood side by side in a dimly lit conference room deep within the Pentagon. The walls were lined with screens displaying maps of the solar system, schematics of alien ships, and data streams that none of them fully understood. General Marcus Hale paced back and forth, his boots clicking against the cold floor. His face was grim, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes as he looked at the two veterans before him. "We don't have much time," Hale began, his voice steady but urgent. "The Zorathians are moving fast. Their fleet is already past Neptune, and they'll reach Earth within weeks if we don't act." Rachel leaned forward, her sharp gaze fixed on the general. "What exactly do you expect us to do? We're not kids anymore. We can't just jump into a fighter and take on an entire fleet." Hale stopped pacing and turned to face them. "I'm not asking you to fight alone. I'm asking you to lead. You've done it before. Trained soldiers, planned missions, executed strategies under impossible conditions. That's what we need now. A team, a strike force." John crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. "And where do we find these soldiers? Most of our people are either dead or retired like us." "That's why we're calling in the old guard," Hale replied. He tapped a button on the table, and a holographic display lit up between them. It showed faces, men and women John and Rachel recognized immediately. Each one had served alongside them during humanity's darkest hours. Some had been legends in their own right. Others had simply done their jobs without seeking recognition. But all of them shared one thing in common. They had once been part of something greater than themselves. Rachel studied the images, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You want us to pull these people out of retirement? After all this time?" "Yes," Hale said firmly. "They may be older, slower, and out of practice, but they're still the best we've got. And if we're going to stand a chance against the Zorathians, we'll need every advantage we can get." John sighed and rubbed his temples. "Even if we manage to bring them together, how do you expect us to train them? We're talking about fighting aliens here, not some human insurgency. These aren't the same battles we fought before." Hale nodded, acknowledging the challenge. "That's why we're retrofitting the Aurora. It's old, sure, but it's sturdy. We're equipping it with whatever weapons and tech we can scrounge up. And as for training..." He paused, his expression hardening. "We don't have the luxury of months or even weeks. You'll have days, maybe less." The weight of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. John glanced at Rachel, who met his gaze with a mixture of determination and skepticism. They both knew what was being asked of them, and what the odds were. This wasn't just another mission, it was a suicide run, plain and simple. But neither of them could bring themselves to walk away. "All right," John said finally, breaking the silence. "Let's see who we're working with." Hale tapped another button, and the hologram shifted to show detailed profiles of the individuals they would be recruiting. The first image was of a man named Daniel Brooks, better known as Danny. He had earned a reputation as a demolitions expert during his service, capable of turning scrap metal into deadly explosives with nothing more than duct tape and ingenuity. Now, according to the file, he ran a small construction company in Texas. Next was Susan Hayes, a medic whose calm demeanor had saved countless lives on the battlefield. She had left the military to work in a hospital, dedicating herself to healing rather than harming. Her profile noted that she still volunteered at local clinics, treating anyone who needed help regardless of their ability to pay. Finally, there was William Grant, or Will, as he preferred to be called. A sniper with unparalleled precision, Will had been feared by enemies and respected by allies alike. After retiring, he had retreated to a cabin in the mountains, living off the land and keeping mostly to himself. "These are your team," Hale said. "If you can convince them to join us, we might have a shot." The next morning, John and Rachel set out to track down their old comrades. Their first stop was a dusty town in West Texas, where Danny Brooks was overseeing the construction of a new housing development. When they arrived, they found him shirtless and sweating under the blazing sun, hammering nails into wooden beams with practiced ease. "Danny," John called out, raising a hand in greeting. Danny squinted at them, then broke into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be damned. John Carter and Rachel Monroe. What brings you two out here?" John chuckled. "We need your help." Danny laughed, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. Environmental suits and advanced weaponry were one thing, but convincing someone to leave behind a peaceful life for a war zone was another entirely. As John explained the situation, Danny's smile faded. By the time he finished, Danny was rubbing the back of his neck, clearly uneasy. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" he asked. "As a heart attack," Rachel replied bluntly. "Look, Danny, we wouldn't be here if we didn't think it mattered. If the Zorathians win, it's not just Earth that's doomed. It's everything." Danny hesitated, glancing around at the half-built houses surrounding him. For a moment, it seemed like he might refuse, but then he nodded slowly. "All right, count me in." Their second recruit was Susan Hayes, who lived in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. They found her tending to patients at a free clinic, her movements calm and deliberate as she checked vitals and administered medication. Unlike Danny, Susan didn't hesitate when they told her why they were there. "I've seen enough death in my life," she said softly. "But if this is what it takes to protect innocent people, then I'll do it." Her resolve surprised even Rachel, who had always admired Susan's compassion but never imagined she'd return to the battlefield so willingly. Still, there was no mistaking the steel in her voice as she packed a bag and prepared to leave. Their final stop was the most difficult. Will Grant's cabin was nestled deep in the Rocky Mountains, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense forests. When they reached the property, they found him sitting on the porch, cleaning a rifle. His piercing blue eyes locked onto them as they approached, and for a moment no one spoke. "You've got 10 seconds to explain why you're here," Will said, his tone as cold as the mountain air. John didn't waste time. "The Zorathians are coming. We need you." Will's expression didn't change, but his grip tightened slightly on the rifle. "Why should I care? Humanity's had its chance. Maybe it's time for someone else to take over." Rachel stepped forward, her voice firm. "Because if you don't care, who will? Because deep down you know you can make a difference. And because running away won't change anything." For a long moment, Will stared at her, his jaw clenched. Then, without a word, he stood up and went inside. When he emerged a few minutes later, he was carrying a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Let's go," he said simply. Back at the base, the team gathered aboard the Aurora, which was undergoing last-minute repairs. The ship creaked and groaned as engineers worked tirelessly to prepare it for combat. Despite its age, the vessel still carried an air of resilience, much like the people now standing on its deck. John addressed the group, his voice steady despite the uncertainty looming ahead. "I won't lie to you. This isn't going to be easy. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched, but we've faced worse odds before, and we've always found a way to win. This time won't be any different." Rachel added, "We're not doing this for glory or recognition. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Because if we don't, no one else will." One by one, the team nodded, their expressions resolute. They might have been older, slower, and out of practice, but they hadn't lost the fire that had driven them to serve in the first place. As the Aurora lifted off the ground and soared toward the stars, they knew the real challenge was just beginning. End of Part 2. The Aurora hummed with activity as it drifted through the cold void of space. Its engines groaned under the strain of carrying a crew that hadn't seen action in decades. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the faint smell of oil from the ship's outdated systems. The team gathered in the main briefing room, a cramped space filled with flickering monitors and mismatched chairs. John Carter stood at the front, leaning against a table covered in maps and schematics. Rachel Monroe sat nearby, her arms crossed, watching the others closely. Danny Brooks was the first to speak. "So let me get this straight," he said, scratching his scruffy beard. "We're supposed to take this rust bucket and go up against an alien fleet that could probably wipe us out before we even blink?" John nodded. "That's about the size of it." Susan Hayes frowned, her soft voice cutting through the silence. "And how exactly are we supposed to prepare for something like that? We don't know anything about their weapons or tactics." "We'll figure it out," Rachel said firmly. "We always have." Will Grant, sitting in the corner with his rifle resting across his lap, finally spoke up. "Figuring it out isn't going to be enough this time. These aren't humans we're dealing with. They're aliens who've been conquering planets for who knows how long. What makes you think we can stop them?" John met Will's piercing gaze without flinching. "Because we don't have a choice. If we don't try, no one else will. And if the Zorathians win, it won't just be Earth they destroy. It'll be everything we've built, everything we stand for." The room fell silent after that. Each member of the team wrestled with their own doubts, but none of them argued further. They knew John was right. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about survival, and maybe, just maybe, proving that humanity still had a place among the stars. Training began immediately. The Aurora's cargo bay was converted into a makeshift combat zone, with crates stacked to simulate cover, and holographic projectors creating mock enemy targets. Despite their age, the team threw themselves into the drills with surprising intensity. Danny worked tirelessly to teach the others how to rig explosives using whatever materials they had on hand. He turned scrap metal and old wiring into crude but effective devices, explaining the principles behind each creation with enthusiasm. "Explosives are all about creativity," he told them one day, holding up a small device he'd cobbled together. "You don't need fancy tech to blow something up, just a little ingenuity and a lot of guts." Susan focused on medical training, teaching the team basic first aid techniques and showing them how to stabilize injuries in the field. She drilled them relentlessly, making sure they understood the importance of keeping each other alive. "In battle, every second counts," she said. "If someone goes down, you can't afford to hesitate. You patch them up and keep moving." Rachel took charge of strategy sessions, poring over maps and data feeds to develop plans for engaging the Zorathians. She emphasized mobility and surprise, knowing full well that brute force wouldn't work against such a superior enemy. "We're not trying to win a war here," she explained. "We're trying to cripple their fleet and buy Earth some time. Hit hard, hit fast, and get out before they realize what hit them." Will spent most of his time alone, practicing his marksmanship in the ship's firing range. His shots were as precise as ever, hitting targets dead center even when they moved erratically. When the others joined him for target practice, he offered tips and corrections, his sharp eyes catching mistakes they didn't even realize they were making. "Accuracy is everything," he said. "One shot, one kill. That's how you survive." As the days passed, the team grew closer. They shared stories of past battles, laughed at old jokes, and reminded each other why they had chosen this life in the first place. Susan talked about the soldiers she had saved during her tours, her voice tinged with pride. Danny recounted wild tales of blowing up enemy tanks with nothing more than a few sticks of dynamite and sheer dumb luck. Even Will opened up a little, sharing memories of long nights spent waiting in sniper nests, watching the world unfold below him. Through it all, John watched silently, observing the bonds forming between his team. He knew they weren't just preparing for a mission, they were becoming a family again, and that, he realized, might be their greatest weapon. Despite their progress, doubts lingered. One evening, as the ship drifted past the orbit of Mars, Rachel found John standing alone on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She joined him, her hands clasped behind her back. "You look like you've got something on your mind," she said. John sighed. "Do you think we can really pull this off, Rachel? I mean, we're talking about taking on an entire alien fleet. What if we're wrong? What if we fail?" Rachel didn't answer right away. Instead, she gazed out at the vast expanse of space, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. "Failure isn't an option. Not this time. If we lose, it's not just us who pay the price. It's everyone. Every human being on Earth, every colony we've built, every dream we've dared to chase. It all ends." John nodded slowly. "I know. But sometimes I wonder if we're asking too much of them, of ourselves." Rachel turned to face him, her eyes steady. "Maybe we are. But since when has that ever stopped us? We've always been the ones to step up when no one else would. That's who we are, John. That's what makes us human." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe, to hope, that they might actually succeed. Then he straightened, shaking off his doubts. "All right," he said, forcing a smile. "Let's finish what we started." The final piece of the puzzle came when General Hale contacted them via a secure transmission. His face appeared on one of the ship's screens, looking weary but determined. "We've intercepted some intel from the Galactic Council," he said. "It's not much, but it's something. The Zorathians rely heavily on their flagship. It's the heart of their fleet. Take it out and you might be able to disrupt their entire operation." John leaned forward, his interest piqued. "How do we find it?" "It emits a unique energy signature," Hale replied. "Our sensors should be able to detect it once you're close enough. But be careful. Their defenses are brutal. You'll only get one shot at this." "Understood," John said. "We'll make it count." After the transmission ended, the team gathered around the table once more. John laid out the plan, pointing to a map of the Sol system. "Here's the deal," he began. "We'll use the Aurora's stealth systems to slip past their outer defenses. Once we locate the flagship, we'll split into two teams. Danny, Susan, and I will infiltrate the ship and plant explosives in key locations. Will and Rachel will stay behind and provide cover fire, picking off anyone who tries to stop us." The others listened intently, nodding as he spoke. There was no argument, no hesitation. They trusted John to lead them, and they trusted each other to follow through. As the meeting concluded, Danny clapped his hands together. "Well, folks, looks like we're going to war. Let's make it a good one." Susan smiled softly, though her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. "Stay safe out there, all of you." Will simply nodded, his expression unreadable. But when he caught Rachel's gaze, she gave him a reassuring smile. "We've got this," she said, "together." The next morning, the Aurora approached the edge of the Zorathian fleet. The massive alien ships loomed ahead, their sleek designs pulsating with eerie, bioluminescent light. As the team prepared for the mission, John addressed them one last time. "This is it," he said, his voice steady. "No turning back now. Remember why we're here. Remember what we're fighting for." With that, they launched their assault, hurtling toward the unknown. The battle had begun. The Aurora drifted silently through the darkness of space, its stealth systems masking its presence as it approached the Zorathian fleet. The alien ships were massive, their sleek organic designs glowing faintly with pulsating lights that seemed almost alive. To John Carter and his team, they looked less like machines and more like creatures from some distant nightmare. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built, bristling with weapons and swarming with smaller fighter craft. Inside the Aurora, the air was tense. The team moved quickly, checking their gear one last time before stepping into action. Danny Brooks adjusted the straps on his backpack, which was filled with explosives he had spent hours preparing. Susan Hayes double-checked her medical kit, ensuring every tool and supply was in place. Will Grant cleaned his sniper rifle for what felt like the 100th time, his hands steady despite the weight of what lay ahead. Rachel Monroe stood near the navigation console, her eyes glued to the sensor readings as the flagship's energy signature grew stronger. John stood at the center of the bridge, his voice calm but firm as he gave final instructions. "Remember the plan," he said. "We get in, plant the charges, and get out, no heroics. Stick together and we'll make it through this." Rachel nodded, her expression resolute. "The flagship's defenses are heavy, but if we time this right, we can slip past them." Will raised an eyebrow. "And if we don't?" "Then we improvise," John replied. "That's what we do best." As the Aurora neared the edge of the Zorathian fleet, the team prepared to launch their attack. The plan was simple but risky. They would use a stolen Zorathian shuttle to infiltrate the flagship. The shuttle had been captured during a previous skirmish and retrofitted to mimic the alien ship's energy signatures. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best chance of getting close without being detected. Danny piloted the shuttle, his hands steady on the controls as he guided it toward the flagship. "All right, folks," he said, glancing over his shoulder at the others. "Here goes nothing." The shuttle slipped past the outer layers of the fleet, weaving between the massive alien ships. For a moment it seemed like they might actually pull it off, but then alarms blared inside the shuttle, startling everyone. A red light flashed on the control panel, indicating that their cover had been blown. "They've spotted us," Rachel shouted, leaning forward to check the sensors. "Fighters incoming!" Sure enough, a squadron of Zorathian fighters appeared on the horizon, their sleek forms cutting through space like knives. They moved with terrifying speed, closing in on the shuttle within seconds. "Hold on!" Danny yelled, jerking the controls hard to the left. The shuttle spun wildly, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma fire. Will grabbed onto his seat, his knuckles white as he steadied himself. "We're not going to make it if we keep flying like this," he snapped. "We don't have a choice," Danny shot back, his voice tight with concentration. "Just give me a second to shake them off." Susan clutched her medical kit to her chest, her face pale but determined. "If anyone gets hurt, I need you all to stay calm. We can't afford to panic." John gripped the back of Danny's seat, his eyes scanning the chaos outside. "Will, get ready to take some shots. If we can disable even one of those fighters, it might buy us enough time." Will unstrapped himself and moved to the rear of the shuttle, where a mounted turret had been installed. He climbed into the seat and took aim, his breathing slow and steady. As the first fighter came into view, he squeezed the trigger, sending a burst of bullets tearing through its hull. The alien craft exploded in a brilliant flash of light, debris scattering across space. "One down," Will muttered, swinging the turret around to target another fighter. "Plenty more where that came from." The battle raged on, the shuttle weaving and dodging as Will fired relentlessly. Danny pushed the engines to their limits, sweat dripping down his face as he fought to keep them alive. Rachel monitored the sensors, calling out enemy positions and warning of incoming fire. Susan stayed close to the others, ready to act if anyone was injured. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shuttle broke free of the pursuing fighters and reached the flagship. The massive alien vessel loomed ahead, its surface covered in strange, pulsating veins that glowed faintly in the darkness. Danny brought the shuttle to a stop near a docking bay, and the team quickly disembarked, their weapons drawn. Inside the flagship, the air was thick with humidity and the faint smell of something metallic. The walls pulsed gently as though the ship itself were alive. Strange, insect-like drones scuttled along the floors and ceilings, their glowing eyes scanning for intruders. The team moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows as they made their way deeper into the ship. "This place gives me the creeps," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "Feels like we're walking into a giant bug hive." "Stay focused," Rachel said sharply. "We don't have time to waste." They reached a junction where several corridors branched off in different directions. Rachel consulted her scanner, trying to locate the ship's core. "It's this way," she said, pointing down the left corridor. "But there's a lot of activity up ahead. We'll need to be careful." John nodded. "Let's split up. Danny, Susan and I will head straight for the core. Will, Rachel, you two stay here and keep watch. If anything comes our way, you take it out." Rachel hesitated, clearly uneasy about splitting the group. But she knew John was right. They couldn't afford to lose momentum. "Be careful," she said finally. "We'll hold this position until you get back." With that, John, Danny, and Susan moved down the corridor, leaving Rachel and Will behind. The two of them took up positions on either side of the junction, their weapons trained on the approaching darkness. For a while, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Rachel glanced at Will, who was crouched low, his rifle aimed steadily at the far end of the corridor. "You think they know we're here?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Will replied. "But I doubt we'll stay hidden for long." As if on cue, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Dozens of Zorathian soldiers appeared, their towering forms clad in shimmering armor. Their weapons glowed ominously as they advanced, their movements precise and mechanical. "Here we go," Will muttered, pulling the trigger. His first shot struck the lead soldier squarely in the chest, sending it crashing to the ground. Rachel followed suit, firing her pistol with deadly accuracy. The narrow corridor became a blur of light and noise as the two humans fought desperately to hold their ground. Despite their efforts, the Zorathians kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. Rachel ducked behind cover, reloading her weapon as quickly as she could. "Will, we can't hold them forever," she shouted. "We don't have to," Will replied, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Just give John and the others enough time to finish the job." Rachel nodded, gritting her teeth as she stepped back into the fray. She knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but she also knew they couldn't give up. Not now. Not when so much depended on their success. Meanwhile, John, Danny, and Susan reached the flagship's core. The massive chamber was filled with glowing conduits and pulsating energy nodes, each one radiating power. Danny immediately set to work planting explosives, his hands moving quickly as he attached timers to key points throughout the room. "How long do we have?" John asked, keeping watch near the entrance. 5 minutes once I hit the button," Danny replied, his voice strained. "That's all I can guarantee." Susan stood nearby, her medical kit open just in case anyone got hurt. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, searching for any sign of danger. "We need to move fast," she said. "I don't like the feel of this place." John nodded. "Once Danny's done, we fall back to the rendezvous point. Rachel and Will cover us." As Danny finished setting the last charge, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Alarms blared throughout the ship and the walls started to pulse faster, as if the flagship itself were aware of the threat. "They know we're here," Danny said, his voice tight. "Let's go." The three of them sprinted back the way they had come, their hearts pounding as the countdown began. Behind them, the core erupted in a series of small explosions, sending shockwaves rippling through the ship. The Zorathian flagship groaned and shuddered, its systems failing as the team raced toward safety. When they reached the junction, they found Rachel and Will still holding their ground, though both were visibly battered. "About time you showed up," Will shouted, firing one last shot before retreating. "Move," John ordered, leading the way back to the shuttle. The flagship was collapsing around them, its organic structure breaking apart as the charges did their work. The team barely made it aboard the shuttle before the entire ship imploded in a spectacular explosion. As they sped away, the team watched, in silence as the Zorathian fleet began to retreat, their formation shattered by the loss of their flagship. Against all odds, they had succeeded. "Well," Danny said finally, breaking the silence. "That was fun." Rachel rolled her eyes, though a hint of a smile played on her lips. "Don't push your luck." John leaned back in his seat, letting out a long breath. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to relax. They had done the impossible and proven that humanity still had a fighting spirit worth respecting. The stolen Zorathian shuttle hurtled through space, its engines straining as it carried John Carter and his team away from the wreckage of the flagship. Behind them, the once mighty alien vessel burned brightly, a funeral pyre for the hopes of the Zorathian fleet. The explosion had sent shockwaves rippling through the enemy formation, scattering their ships like leaves in a storm. For now at least, the immediate threat to Earth had been neutralized. Inside the shuttle, the mood was tense but triumphant. Danny Brooks leaned back in his seat, wiping sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his jacket. His hands were still, trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush, but a grin spread across his face as he looked around at the others. "Well, I guess we showed those bastards what happens when you mess with humans," he said, his voice tinged with pride. Susan Hayes sat nearby, her medical kit open on her lap. She had already tended to a few minor injuries, cuts and bruises sustained during the chaotic escape, but nothing serious. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't out of danger yet. Her sharp eyes scanned the group, lingering briefly on Rachel Monroe, who was seated near the cockpit, her expression unreadable. Rachel's thoughts were elsewhere. She stared out the window at the remnants of the Zorathian fleet, her mind racing. While destroying the flagship had dealt a significant blow to the enemy, she knew it wasn't enough to end the war. The Zorathians were too organized, too determined, to simply give up after one setback. This victory was temporary, a fleeting moment of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. John Carter stood near the front of the shuttle, gripping the back of Danny's seat as he gazed at the stars ahead. He felt a mixture of relief and unease. They had accomplished the impossible, but the cost weighed heavily on him. Every decision he had made, every order he had given, had put his team in harm's way. And while they had survived this time, there were no guarantees about what lay ahead. Will Grant remained silent, his rifle resting across his lap. Unlike the others, he didn't share in the sense of triumph. Instead, he replayed the battle in his mind, analyzing every shot, every movement. He couldn't help but wonder how long their luck would hold. The Zorathians were relentless and their numbers were overwhelming. How many more missions like this could they endure before someone didn't make it back? As the shuttle approached the Aurora, the old ship came into view, battered but intact. Its hull bore fresh scars from the earlier skirmish, evidence of the fierce fight that had taken place. Despite its condition, the sight of the Aurora filled the team with a sense of homecoming. It was more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of their resilience, proof that humanity could still stand tall even when the odds were stacked against them. Danny guided the shuttle into the docking bay, and the team disembarked quickly. Engineers and technicians swarmed around them, checking systems and making repairs. The air inside the Aurora buzzed with activity as everyone worked tirelessly to prepare for whatever might come next. General Marcus Hale appeared moments later, his face etched with both relief and concern. He greeted the team warmly but wasted no time getting down to business. "You did good," he said, his voice firm, "but the Zorathians aren't done yet. Their fleet is regrouping and they'll be coming for us soon." John nodded grimly. "We figured as much. What's our next move?" Hale hesitated, glancing at each member of the team before speaking. "The Council has agreed to send reinforcements, ships and troops from other species, but it'll take time for them to arrive. Until then, we're on our own." Rachel stepped forward, her tone sharp. "How much time are we talking about?" "Days, maybe a week," Hale admitted. "But the Zorathians won't wait that long. We need to buy ourselves some breathing room." John exchanged a glance with Rachel, then turned back to Hale. "Tell us what to do." The plan was risky, but it was all they had. Using the intelligence gathered during their infiltration of the flagship, Rachel identified several key targets within the Zorathian fleet, supply depots, communication hubs, and smaller support ships. By striking these weak points, they hoped to disrupt the enemy's ability to launch another coordinated attack. "We'll split into 2 teams," John explained during a hurried briefing. "Danny, Susan, and I will hit the supply depot. Will and Rachel, you take out the communications hub. If we can cut off their supplies and silence their comms, it might slow them down long enough for the reinforcements to arrive." The team listened intently, nodding as John outlined the details. There were no objections, no arguments. They trusted him to lead them, just as they always had. Each person understood the stakes and the risks. The mission began under the cover of darkness. The Aurora deployed 2 small strike craft, each carrying half the team. Danny piloted the first ship, his hands steady on the controls as he guided it toward the supply depot. John and Susan sat behind him, their weapons ready. In the second ship, Rachel manned the controls while Will prepared his sniper rifle, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. As they approached their respective targets, the Zorathians seemed unprepared for another attack so soon. Their defenses were weaker than expected, likely due to the confusion caused by the destruction of the flagship. Still, the team moved cautiously, knowing that even a single mistake could spell disaster. Danny's ship landed near the supply depot, a sprawling complex filled with crates and containers of alien equipment. The trio disembarked quickly, sticking to the shadows as they made their way inside. Susan kept watch while Danny set charges on key structures. "This should cripple their operations," he muttered, attaching timers to the explosives. Meanwhile, Rachel and Will reached the communications hub, a towering structure pulsating with energy. The facility was guarded by a handful of Zorathian soldiers, their movements mechanical and precise. Rachel signaled for Will to take position, then crept closer to draw their attention. As the guards turned toward her, Will opened fire, his shots hitting their marks with deadly accuracy. One by one the soldiers fell, clearing the path for Rachel to plant charges deep within the building. Back at the supply depot, things took a turn for the worse. Just as Danny finished setting the last charge, alarms blared throughout the complex. Reinforcements arrived faster than anyone had anticipated, pouring into the area with overwhelming force. John reacted instantly, taking cover behind a stack of crates as plasma bolts whizzed past his head. "Danny, get those charges armed," he shouted over the chaos. "I'm trying," Danny yelled back, his fingers flying over the controls. "Give me 10 seconds. Susan moved to provide cover, firing her weapon with steady precision. Her aim was true, taking down several enemies before they could close in. But the Zorathians kept coming, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm. "The trio, John, we can't hold them forever," Susan called out, ducking as a bolt grazed her shoulder. She gritted her teeth against the pain, refusing to let it slow her down. 5 seconds, Danny shouted, his voice strained. "Just 5 more seconds." John stepped into the open, drawing fire away from his teammates. Bullets tore through his armor, but he ignored the pain, focusing solely on keeping the enemy occupied. "Now, Danny," he barked, diving for cover as explosions rocked the depot. The charges detonated, sending flames and debris spiraling into the air. The supply depot collapsed in on itself, cutting off the Zorathians' access to vital resources. John, Danny, and Susan retreated to their ship, battered but alive. At the communications hub, Rachel and Will faced similar challenges. As Rachel planted the final charge, a squad of Zorathian drones descended upon them, their glowing eyes locking onto the intruders. Will fired relentlessly, picking off the drones one by one, but more kept coming. Rachel worked frantically, her hands shaking as she activated the timer. "Will, we need to go," she shouted, sprinting toward their ship. "I'm right behind you," Will replied, covering her retreat with a barrage of bullets. The two barely made it aboard before the charges exploded, reducing the communications hub to rubble. Both teams returned to the Aurora, just as the Zorathians launched a counterattack. The old ship shuddered under the weight of enemy fire, its shields flickering dangerously. Engineers scrambled to keep the systems online as the crew braced for impact. In the command center, John addressed the team, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "We've bought ourselves some time," he said. "But this isn't over. Not yet." Rachel nodded, her expression resolute. "Then let's finish what we started." Together they prepared for the next phase of the battle, knowing that survival depended on their ability to adapt, improvise, and persevere. Against all odds, they had proven that humanity still had a fighting spirit worth respecting. And they weren't done fighting. Not by a long shot.